Ingenious devices keep me alive in perpetual motion. These ingenious devices turn.
Hello and welcome to part 3 of this video tutorial where we're looking at making a steampunk mask. In this final part of the video series I'm going to look at some of the details I didn't have time to cover in part 2. I'm also going to look at working on the ventilation system for the mask, some of the electronics, and finally look at the mask at the Asylum Steampunk event in Lincoln. So you may have noticed that I've got some decals on the mask, and these are a logo for the Imperial Etheric Airways, which is my friend's steampunk troupe. As you can see here, I've printed off some logo designs and I've printed these onto decal paper. Now, one thing to bear in mind with this is if you printed these out with an inkjet printer, then the ink will actually come off when you put the decal in water to separate it from the backing paper. So what you need to do is give it a layer of a clear varnish. So this is what I've used here. It's a clear lacquer by High Coat, and that seems to do the trick. So as with any other decal, it's the same process. Just cut out the piece, soak it in water, and then you can slide it onto the model. As you can see, I've already masked off a circle here to allow space for the decal. One thing I did do here is actually give it another layer of varnish once this had dried. So that's just to make sure that the decal doesn't peel off or get damaged in any way. I also needed something to go over the ears, and I've hung on to this pair of headphones that I won in a raffle years back. I really like the detail on them and I thought they'd come in handy at some stage. So these look like they'll work here. So as you can see, I've just got two pieces here. I've taken off the headband and pulled out all the electronics. So I've given it a layer of spray paint here. I thought it would look okay if one was blue and one was red. And I've given it a backing of leather, which I've dyed. And all I've done here is to sew the piece onto the leather. So one thing that I definitely need for the mask is some form of ventilation. Because the mask is skin tight, my breath just heats the mask up pretty quickly and also causes the lenses to fog up. So it's a bit of an issue if you're going to be wearing this thing for hours on end. So I need some way of cooling the mask down and getting rid of the moisture that can build up from my breath. So what I'm doing here is cutting out some plywood pieces, and I'm going to build a ventilation unit out of plywood and guttering pipe. I'm using a technique that I've used on a few projects now. If you've seen my previous video about making a steampunk exo-suit, you'll have seen a similar process. So what I'm doing is cutting out the shapes in plywood. I'm then covering them in styrene plastic to give them a nice smooth finish. I'm just joining the pieces together at the edges using liquid solvent cement. This is something that just melts the styrene plastic together so it becomes one piece. Quite useful stuff because it really does create a very secure join. So here's my initial design for the ventilation unit. What I've done is to put a piece of wood in the middle of the guttering pipe there, so there's actually two compartments. And the idea is that air is going to get sucked in from the sides, go through a right angle join and then through the pipes to the mask. And the pieces on the side there are just the internal cardboard tube from rolls of masking tape. They turned out to be exactly the right internal diameter for the fan. So here's my fan, and this is built from several things. I've taken the motor out of a USB fan. The reason I've done that is because it runs on 5 volts, so I know I can run that off 6 AA batteries, which will give out about 6 volts. I've also used the actual fan itself from a PC fan. So as you can see, that fits quite snugly into the tube there. So this part of the costume took quite a lot of testing. As you can see, the motor's running here and it's blowing air into the ventilation unit. I am getting some airflow through the pipe. The thing is, it's not really that strong. It's not like there's gusts of wind being blown through that. Now, after a lot of experimentation, I think the basic problem with this is the fact that it's having to go through a right angle before it even gets to the pipe. So I think that's causing a lot of air to bounce back out of the aperture, and it's not actually getting directed into the pipe at all. So after some back and forth, I decided to change the design of this, and as you can see, I've split the intakes into two separate pieces, one for each pipe. I think it would work much better if it was simply going straight into the pipe rather than going through a right angle. As you can see, I've made a cone out of cardboard here to taper the intake down to the size of the pipe.
So you joined me conducting a ventilator test here. So what I've got is a ventilator unit here connected up to the mast. And as you can see, I have two fans here which are actually blowing. So what they're doing is they're sucking air out of the mast. So what that basically means is that when I breathe, my breath is being sucked out and vented into the atmosphere. Now what I've got here is an air intake here, and air is getting sucked in there. So the practical upshot of that is quite cool actually. When I tested these, I found it very difficult to force air into the intakes and get it up the pipe, so I was getting virtually no airflow whatsoever. And then I suddenly thought, well, what if I reverse the airflow? And suddenly the airflow was really, really strong, and I can really feel air moving inside the mask. So that's great. So it does two things. One, it's allowing air to circulate and allowing me to breathe. The other thing is, because it's venting my air out of the mask, it's stopping the goggles from fogging up. So that sort of solved two problems with one solution really, so that's really cool. So yeah, as you can see, there's my fans blown away, and I've got my electronics on the back there. And I've got a big kill switch on the back there as well as somewhere I've got some individual, there we go, some individual switches there which will turn off each fan independently if I need to. I've done some tests with this, and I've found that the batteries will actually last a really long time. So I've been wearing this now for about 20 minutes, and I've got no fogging up issues, and I can breathe pretty well. So that bodes well for the Asylum. Obviously I'll be wearing it for a little bit longer than 20 minutes. Nevertheless, we'll see how we get on. So looking good so far. The next step is to mount this on my back so I don't have to carry it around. So that's just a matter of some padding and a few leather straps. But a pretty good field test so far.
So here's a test of the costume all put together, and as you can see, I've got the ventilation unit on my back and it's connected to the mask. One problem I had though was that the pipes are actually quite taut. So the problem was that the point where the pipe connects on the backpack was actually quite far away from the point that it connects to the mask. So I needed to move that closer. So in this shot, hopefully you can see that I've actually shortened the supports on the air intake. So now the connectors are much closer together, and that means they're not taut, and it gives me a much better range of movement. So now looking at the electronics, you may recall from the previous video that I had the Arduino set up working with a tilt switch. Every time I moved the tilt switch, the servo would move. So the idea being that when I tilt my head, the servos would move and cause the flaps on the mask to go up and down in sequence. Now I've been waiting for some more servos to arrive, and they hadn't when I made the previous part of the video, but I have now. So as you can see here, I've got my sequence of servos moving. So when I tilt the tilt switch, you can see each servo moves in sequence. So here's the servos mounted on the mask, and as you can see, I've got them connected up to my test board. So if I move the tilt switch, as you can see, the flaps are now moving in sequence. So that's a basic test of principle, but obviously I need to get all of this electronics into the mask compartment at the back of the head for that, but it's quite small, and I'm not going to fit this large white breadboard that you can see here in the back, so I need to solder up my own. So that's just a simple case of soldering a bunch of positive and negative lines together just to make sure everything's connected correctly. After testing though, one thing I found was that the Arduino kept shutting off, and I think what was happening is once the servos were under load, there was too much current flowing through the Arduino. Now I read online that a way to overcome this is to actually have a separate power supply for the servos. So that's what you can see here. I've got 4 AA batteries which are connected directly to the servos, then I've got a 9-volt battery for the Arduino, and the only thing the Arduino is doing is sending the command signals via those orange wires to the Arduinos. All of the currents flowing separately through the battery, so that's allowed it to run correctly. However, once I had everything connected together, I found that the tilt switch for whatever reason just wasn't functioning anymore. So as you can see in this video, the servos are running in sequence, but it's not happening because the tilt switch is being activated. In actual fact, it just seems to be doing it at random, which was a bit of a problem. The other problem I encountered was because I had some additional batteries in the mask, which I hadn't originally accounted for, things had got a little bit tight, so I did manage to fit all of the electronics into the compartment at the back. But because it was so crowded, I ended up with a battery connector sticking in the back of my head, which was getting a bit painful. So after thinking about it for a bit, I decided to disconnect the electronics for the event. But what I'm going to do is build a stand for this and have it as a static display with the Arduino running. I do quite a lot of events, so this mask will be displayed on a table more often than I'll be wearing it. So I think that's probably the better solution. And finally, here's me at the Asylum. Now, as you can see, I've got the whole costume on here. And I have to say, actually, the ventilation system worked really, really well. I really could feel air moving through the mask, and that was great. It was quite a warm weekend, so I think without that, I probably would have died of heat exhaustion. But no, the ventilation system worked really, really well. Really did keep me cool. In fact, one of the main questions I had from people is, oh, you must be warm in there. But actually I wasn't. It was actually pretty comfortable. And I was also quite surprised that the batteries that I had in the ventilation system actually ran all weekend. I didn't have to change them once. There's 4 AA batteries per fan, and I think I worked out that they could run for at least 5 or 6 hours each. I had it on for longer than that, so that worked really, really well. So if you're ever making a mask, I really do recommend adding ventilation to it, because it was a lifesaver on this occasion. As you can see, I've also got a few other pieces here for the costume. I've got 2 shin guards, which I've also painted up in the same uni-inject design as the mask. Now, these are made in exactly the same way that I made the pieces of the mask. So what I did was to shape some foam into the correct shape for my legs. I then covered it in fiberglass and gave it a layer of polyester resin. So as you can see in the photo here, it looks a little bit like they're made of ice cream. This resin's tinted with white pigment. I then sanded it all down again with a random orbit sander, filled in any gaps until I got it nice and smooth. I then just masked off the pattern, put some decals on, and there you go. I've also got a Steampunk Revolver. Now, this was sort of made in a similar way to the mask as well. I took the idea of making some cast resin pieces that I used on the back of the mask and extended that idea to making a gun. So as you can see here, it's got sort of 6 pressure vessels that look a little bit like bullets. What I did here was to cast the same piece twice. So there's 3 pressure vessels, which I've cast up and just replicated that on the other side. You can probably recognise some other pieces from the mask here. I've got my little round connector bent thing here, which I've also got on both sides. And on the back of the gun, I've also got the pressure vessel thing that's on the back of the mask. So I thought this is quite a cool way of replicating some mechanical details quite quickly and building up a piece. So this was fairly quick to put together. The main frame is made from plywood covered in styrene plastic, the same process I used for the ventilation backpack. Then it's just covered in resin cast pieces. The handle was covered in leather. I just wet that until it was nice and supple and bent it around the handle. And as you can see, there's some soldered copper tubes for the barrel. So that's it for the video. There'll be another series of build logs next year for the Asylum, but in the meantime there'll be plenty of other videos coming, so thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Ingenious devices keep me alive in perpetual motion. These ingenious devices.
Thanks very much for watching. I'll be posting videos on future projects, so if you'd like to keep up with what's going on, please do subscribe. Alternatively, you can visit my website, which is www.thedarkpower.com, or you can find me on Facebook. Just search for The Dark Power.
Me alive in perpetual motion. These ingenious devices filled with the steam from 1,000 pistons. These ingenious devices.